Okay. Okay. Welcome back to Side Quest X, Chrono Trigger 3 of perhaps 4. And back with me, my perennial party member and contemporary, constant, and current companion, Wes Schantz. Good to see you, Wes.
Yeah, I'm sorry I'm all like glowing right now from the sun, but it
You're
just
very
gets so little
enlightening
that I
and
gotta
illuminating. We're looking forward to
gotta
that.
take what
Yeah.
I can
Yeah.
get. Yeah, so how's the game treating you since we last spoke 2 days ago or 3 days ago?
It's so funny how time moves, and I'm not making a pun on Chrono Trigger. It's an unintentional pun on the Chrono part of it. But a few days ago, I was behind, and now I'm on schedule, but in some ways ahead because I know I'm ahead of you, which is, and the I don't have to be fast. I just have to be faster than you to be fast by my own
To
lights
get
when
caught
we're
by this
doing this,
bear?
right? When you're doing a podcast with a partner, if you're the one slightly ahead, you are ahead regardless of the schedule. And but I'm not going to
Yeah.
rely on that because you can be pretty quick when you put your mind to it or when you have the appropriate amount of time. I know it's been the weekend, and you are a father of three. I am a father to two doodles, and that is a little bit different in terms of time commitments. It is Mardi Gras here though, but like many people that have seen
Hey.
many Mardi Gras, I we had a party, we saw a parade, we're done. Um, uh,
Yeah.
though Though we have seen our friends from out of town try to brag about going to Mardi Gras. They're like a week late, missing the best parades, missing the best feasts, but they'll see Mardi Gras. It's good too. Um, I would say the game is treating me really well. I'm doing the new game plus. I said I was going to talk about that with you, and perhaps I will get to talk about that with you. But I'm enjoying it much more than I thought I would. It is nice to just work through the puzzles and
Hmm.
shoot through the game without having to spend a ton of time fighting. I have quickly relearned the battle system and the importance of using magic and weapons, though that hasn't been super important because I can still one-shot almost every enemy, though occasionally not. I have a really destructive triple tech with Marley and Luca and Chrono called, I think, Delta Force, which does thousands of
Mm.
damage to people. I One thing I should say is, so according to IGN, there are 19 parts to this game. I'm 12 parts in. I've just gotten the Masamune broken, fought Masa and Mune, and take it and gone to Melchior's hut in the current era of 1000. I've visited Robo's era of 2300. I've seen the end of time. I've seen 600 AD, the Middle Ages. So suppose, or 600, whatever it is. I guess it's called AD.
It
Um,
is, I think, yeah.
it should be AG after Guardia, right? But because the kingdom is named Guardia. But so I visited there. I know of Magus and his deeds. I've met Glenn, named Frog. Know of his inability to defend the queen, and so now I'm what 12/19ths of the way through the game, which is where we wanted to get to. Though I do not yet have Magus, but I will have him pretty soon. Um, so
Thanks.
so all that goes to say is that the play has been fun, even though it's a new game plus. I have been tempted to use the right part of the time machine and fight Lavos a few times, especially now that I've relearned how to use double tax, triple tax, magic, fighting. Now that I've gotten back in the swing of things, as it were, which I was a little afraid I wouldn't get back into the swing of things just because of the lack of necessity. And again, I still consider it funny that I'm something like more than halfway through the game, only 4.5 hours into the game. And Chrono and Lena or Lean have just Princess Nadia, another princess changing her name. Lots of similarities to Final Fantasy IX, like Robo and Vivi, for example, created to destroy. But she and Chrono have only leveled up once the entire game. So more than half the game, and I'm not at some extraordinarily inflated level. She was at level 46, he was at level 49.
Uh-huh.
So that's like so that is my shot in the dark, or just my very, very brief exposition on how the ludology has been, how it's been getting back in the swing of things, how it's been playing a new game plus for the first time, and being pretty OP, as you say, or as we say on this program, overpowered. And I am enjoying the game, and I'm enjoying the music a ton. I got my audio to work on my PS3, which sometimes it's
Mhm.
in, sometimes it's out because I think I have an old cord. And again, I bought the PS3 10 years old in like 2017 to first do Final Fantasy VII or play Final Fantasy VII with you in podcasts on it. So this machine is excellent. It's like 18 years old, still playing. It's got all the best games in some ways. Final Fantasy VI, Xenogears, Chrono Trigger, Final Fantasy VII, Final Fantasy VIII on it.
Some of the good
And
stuff.
it is pretty good. Even though I did play Final Fantasy VIII and 9 on one on the PS5, one on the Switch. So I'm switching around all the time, and am now looking for a Valve Steam Deck, which and apparently they've all kind of disappeared and are not being replenished. So
Hmm.
just another hidden item to try and find. But my friend, that was my sort of messy, all over the place
Okay.
attempt at explaining my first half or two-thirds of this playthrough. One thing I would mention just in tandem with asking about your experience is that the end of time I also find interesting in terms of my research project with Death Peak, Purgatory, and um, and uh, and Dante. The end of time is also a very interesting sort of place in terms of because there is of course a Christian end of time as well,
Mm.
and Dante honors that idea through the notion of the resurrection. There must be an end time for there to be a resurrection. The world has there must be an apocalypse, as it were.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah, yeah. The end of time is triggered by a mechanical issue, right? With the four-member party.
yes, yes, the
I think
four
that
and three.
there's a few things that we should correct from last time. That's one of them. I think, yeah, the three-person party is a core element, like you mentioned. There's dual techs and triple techs, but you never have four
No,
to explore with at any point because when you do it triggers this thing with the time gates, which is really a clever, I mean, way to limit that actually. Because there's never really an explanation in other games about like why your party has to be limited to three or four or five or whatever it is, right? Um, it's just kind of a taken for granted. But in this one they do write that in. Um, yeah, and so then that is um, a point on the timeline, which is sort of not connected with the actual world, right? It's after everything is happened and the world has ended, and it's sort of its own spot, um, and it's a really I don't know, just evocative place. Um, it's also where you learn magic, right? You go through that little doorway, and the little Speakio guy, he'll have you walk clockwise or whatever it is, and he'll teach
three
you
times.
using magic for each of the characters. Um, yeah, so that's cool. And he is the model, I believe, for the dolls that we were talking about last time. Or if they're not the same, they're at least pretty darn similar. Because there's two dolls. There's two types of doll, right? There's the Chrono dummy or like stand-in, and you bring that to replace the body of Chrono with that doll, right? And you take him out of that moment, and use the Chrono trigger, the time egg, right? But then to scale Death's Peak, there's a separate doll that you have to use to, like you said, like put down, and it sprouts the tree and it blocks the wind for your party. So that was the other. I think there was another correction, but the new game plus. That's the idea. Yeah. There are some items that don't come with you, but I had it backwards. Most of your items do come with you, right?
Yes.
There's only certain like key story items like the Masamune
But
sword.
you don't start with them equipped. You
They're
start
just in your
with your
inventory.
weakest stuff equipped. So that's the thing about going to
Yeah.
Lavos immediately. And if we're going to do retractions and corrections, well, look forward to Final Fantasy VII Remake because Otto went back through our early stuff and mostly
Good.
my errors, but things like the opening cinematic. And I actually have to go back and look and see whether they're all errors. I'm almost 100% certain that he's correct, but I'm not 100% certain. So I have to
There's
I have to make sure, but I
that
I I think we'll be making some corrections the next time we meet for that, maybe this next week.
that sounds good.
Well,
No,
but that
that's the scholarly
but
project. Yeah. And so okay, I think yeah, with my playthrough, I am still in the future. So I have yet to meet Robo, but I did go through the sewers.
R667.
Yeah, whatever his actual name is. Um, and I met the mysterious old man. He's just called the old man right now, who is hanging out there with one of the moo creatures, the big blue guys. and he asks if I have encountered some of his greatest work, like the Blackbird, and I forget the other thing he says, maybe the Zeal Palace or something like that. So I never did that when I used to play through the game. I would just go straight where I was supposed to go. But in the future, you can go through the sewer and you can visit him. You can go to Death Peak, but the wind will blow you away, right? And it'll stop you from progressing there. Um, and so we've actually met two of the three uh, gurus, as they're called, or sages or whatever. Melchior, we meet him right in the very first, the Millennial Fair. And then this other one, I think this one is Balthazar. And then Gaspar you meet at the end of time without knowing who he is. He's the old man who hangs out by the lantern or the lamppost or whatever. Um, and so the this goes way back to our uh, our original episode, but I was reading at that time, and I'm still reading now, this material on the reverse design books. I don't own them because they're very expensive, but a lot of
Yeah,
the basic
you can
stuff.
get the Z Library one for free. There's one on Z Library. I actually just got it,
Oh, dang, nice.
or someone I know just got it today. So
I'll have to
I know it's there.
look into that because yeah, that's some really good material for like looking at the structure of the game and how the pieces sort of fit together. And it's Pat Holloman, and he goes into a lot of the data percentages, just like very very nitty gritty stuff. And so the um the way that he structures the game, which I think makes a lot of sense, is it's really sort of two parts, right? You have everything up until Chrono is taken out of the party, and then everything from there on out, really. Um, and everything up till that point is very linear. Although, like, you can go and explore stuff, it won't affect anything really. Um, and then everything after that point is going to have effects that'll kind of cross over between the times, and all of that is going to impact the outcome in terms of the ending that you get and like items and mechanical things like that as well. So he has a really good table that just kind of breaks down the first series of quests and what effect, if any, they have on history. And essentially, they don't have any effect. Although, like for our party, they're very important, right? They do have things like they save the princess's life. They allow you to escape from the chancellor in the present once you're breaking out of jail. Of course, it allows us to get to the end of time when you rescue Robo, and you get that seed, which has definitely got some thematic value, if nothing else, right? That seed in the future. It's an idea that's kind of carried through the game from then on out. But yeah, in terms of like what impact you have on the timeline writ large, like are you stopping Lavos? Absolutely not, right? Everything is kind of bent around the gravitational pull of Lavos. Um, yeah, yeah, and like you said, Magus, uh, I would say the end of time forms like a nice kind of interlude. The Magus battle, it looks like that's the end of the game initially, right? He's sort of that, apparent master villain, mastermind. And then for me, the most like powerful moments in the game are between that sequence and then the stuff in Zeal, which comes a little bit after. When you go from fighting Magus in his castle through the 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 distant past, and then you have the Zeal Kingdom, which is the last. I think I'm correct in saying it's the last like point on the timeline that we get to explore, and it's kind of a unique one as well as Pat Hallman points out. It's a section of the game that doesn't really follow the pattern that we've seen up to that point of like you explore, you have town, you have dungeon, you like warp through time, right? It's kind of a more relaxed in a way, but also very sinister. Like there is not a dungeon exactly. Um, you just have to escape the Blackbird in there. And so yeah, I mean, I think the the Magus stopping point for me makes sense as like a first half of the game. just in terms of content. But in terms of the like deeper structure of the game, I do still like his idea of like it really goes up through the getting defeated by Lavos, right? And then having to regroup and decide what to do about Chrono. Um, so yeah, I think the material in the online version is great, but I definitely want to look at the full version of that book if it is at all handy. Have you found other good sources in your researches so far? Or anything
Well,
like
yeah.
jumping out at
So,
you?
so first thing I should say is I have the book. It just is a digital book. So the only thing missing is the physical aspect. So there's no material missing from the reverse design, and that shadow libraries, use them at your own risk if you want to or don't want to. But you can, if you want to spend the money on the more analog version, I think that's a good that I mean will help the authors most. And I like the idea of I mean, it makes sense to me that the game could be split in terms of themes and gameplay as well. Once it becomes less linear, in some ways that it becomes the game that you've been trying to play the entire time.
Hmm.
Um, Now there's a game with sort of the proto RPG elements that really I think spawned the notions of open worlds, and particularly ones like Morrowind, where there are consequences, which is now RPG decisions. Now you don't have to go everywhere. You can choose where you could go, want to go and see as much as you want to, like Final Fantasy 8, 9, 7, 6. But you now the things that you do will change the ending, perhaps, or
Yeah.
what is present in certain times. And I think that element being in this game is part of the transformation of this genre, the JRPG, into is part of what made it was part of this was the transformation in time. It was part of a larger transformation that reflected the desires of the young people playing these games and the people developing them in terms of what a video game could be. And
Yeah.
part of what a video game could be is sort of like a simulation of reality in that there's both cause and effect. There's decision, action, and result. And that result isn't just game over, try again and do it again. But now, since it's an RPG, like a 20 to 40 hour sort of experience, you can sit with this for the remainder of the narrative, like Chrono's Dead, for example, or something like that. And you can do a new game plus and really sit with it even longer and maybe even change things. But insofar as you want to change things, you're going to have to consciously choose to have different people in your party, go for different side quests, integrate different materials, and so it does make sense to me that in some ways the game gets much richer near the end, and also the stakes seem to be much higher, and also the game seems to transform in real time from a typical JRPG from that time, like a Dragon Quest, or what it could have been as a linear but very fun sort of medieval but a little bit of time jumping experience
Yeah.
into something that really grabs at your heart or at your subjective experience. The moment you have to make decisions like keeping the main character dead, or in like say Knights of the Old Republic romance decisions, or being mean to characters like trying to be mean to Aerith in Final Fantasy VII so that you get a date with Tifa at Golden Saucer. This is part of what I think makes a JRPG rich. You still
Yeah.
feel emotions, even though you're interacting with the simulation and with characters that don't feel emotions like an organic conscious being, sure. But, in sort of a Kantian way, even though they're non-conscious, still affects your own feeling of morality to treat them poorly. So, like Kant says,
Yeah.
well, you don't actually have a duty to a chair, but if you are breaking chairs, well, perhaps you should have had a duty to the person who made the chair, but also that could still reflect poorly on your own character developing such a habit towards inanimate beings and that might segue into how you treat animate beings to whom or to which you do have duties and responsibilities. So maybe you shouldn't go around and just be crazy to, inanimate objects. Um, but but okay, yeah, sorry. I'm sort of losing my thread there, but I know I put a bunch on the table, so maybe I'll just stop there for the moment.
Well, no, I think it's kind of the illusion of the game, right? That you're impacting. reality. And that's
Right.
happening on lots of levels because it's like, yes, it's a game and it's a very small slice of reality, but it is in some way real, right? There is some kind of information that's transferring. There is some kind of interpretation that you're doing, and it is training you in some kind of fashion, right? While I would never be like deterministic about like, well, if you shoot stuff in the game, then it's making you more likely to shoot stuff in
Right.
real life. Or on the other hand, oh, that's allowing you to like get that bad emotion out. Like it's purely cathartic and it
Mm.
makes you less likely to shoot stuff in real life. You know,
Mm.
it helps you handle emotion. Like it's clearly not a one-to-one thing in that way,
Huh.
but it's clearly doing something to you. At the very least, helping you learn to read media
Yes.
objects, you know, and stuff like that. And that's really important in the world today. And I mean, I think that's um, another level of it is just like, does what Chrono and his friends do on their timeline jumping actually affect the timeline in any way? And again, it seems like not really because, everything was kind of fated to happen in a certain way because they're able to do it in the first place, like logically they must have already done it in some
Mm.
way to be there to do it, right? So there's this kind of like uh, helix that happens there, and it only really gets broken when that egg, right, that time egg hatches, and it suddenly allows for a lot more stuff to happen, and that's the moment that Radical Dreamers and Chrono Cross takes as kind of the point of departure as well. Like, okay, once people start interacting with this being, Lavos, whatever it is, right, and the entity sort of has taken notice of them and is getting involved, well, let's like try to spell out what that might mean. And so then they really go to town and have the idea of like, so then there has to be parallel universes that split off, that branch out, that, you know, eventually ramify to where they interact in some way what looks like our real world, like in one, maybe the ending or the good ending. I think it's the good ending of Chrono Cross. It has like some footage of a street in Tokyo or something, and you're looking for this person, right? And so, like, how far can you go within the game until it starts to impact the real world? Like, the game is kind of thinking about that problem, right? And I think this is the interesting thing about the whispers in Final Fantasy VII Remake as well, right? That this is a kind of approach the developers have taken, consciously or not, that it really looks like a commentary on the way that people are interpreting the game, right? And the way that they want the game to proceed in a certain way, right? The kind of will of the planet is also the will of the fans to an extent. And and so there's this trial scene where it looks like what's happening is because you made certain choices at the fair, your character is being, either blackened, right, or buffered in a nice way. What's actually happening is you're going to go to jail no matter what, right? And so it doesn't actually matter what you did at the fair, but it is a way for the game to make it really seem like it does, right? And so the same thing goes for uh, actions that you're taking to save the princess, to try to understand what's happening in the future, right? You're actually on a very linear series of little quests, but it certainly feels like each time you're expanding the the aperture, the field of action, the field of agency. And it feels that way because your party's getting stronger, because you're gaining more abilities, because you're gaining more party members, you're meeting more people, you're understanding more about the world, and ultimately you're understanding more about yourself, right? There's this kind of process of self-transformation that is dramatized and that I think is kind of actual, right? It seems that way at least in taking a deep dive like this. So I think it's certainly possible that that's in there. Um, I think that component of it uh, to me is much more effective in these very circumscribed games actually than in open world games that are like more truly dependent on the player's choice and stuff like that. Because in a weird way, I feel like when your choices matter on the world of the game, they kind of they kind of stay there versus when they don't matter as much, when they are pursuing a story that's been crafted with a great amount of intention and skill, then they can kind of have this effect of, as you think about them more, as you understand that story better and the ways that it's put together, that actually is going to redound to the player having a greater yeah, enlightenment, if you want to say that, or like intuition about reality and their role in it. But that again, I mean, that might just be my, I'm biased towards thinking that there is kind of the operation of a story or a myth that structures reality. That just has a very powerful ring of truth to it for me, versus a kind of, you know, stuff is just happening. But
I mean,
but yeah.
so so some of the work I do is on decision theory, and I can tell you for a fact that how humans think, and this is well known by cognitive scientists today, um, is that we think we confabulate and we attempt to create causal stories for the world. So when I listen to NFX and he talks about how nobody thought I would make it, and now everybody says that they saw what was in me the whole time. It's like, well, that's how people think. Once something has happened, they start to think causally and start to try and think about the cause. Now they're often extremely wrong about the causes, but that is ancillary to your perspective. Your perspective is that there's some governing myth underlying um well, this game, but maybe even just thinking as it were. And that seems almost certainly true, that people think narratively and causally, just often identifying the wrong causal elements, and missing ones like noise and things like that. Like, you might think somebody's judging your character. Really, they have some gas after eating a weird lunch, and so it could be one or the other. But that's we don't necessarily think or try to discover the gas explanation first. We just think, oh well, this just must not have gone our way. But okay, you said several interesting things that I just want to touch on, and we'll see if we just touch on them, or rather give them more of like a full scale treatment and massage. But I'm gonna say the themes first, because there's so much to talk about in each of them that I don't know which direction we'll go. But so I do want to talk a little bit about virtual worlds and ethics, and perhaps all of these can end up being their own shows at some point. Because as you were talking about virtual worlds, I was thinking about differing levels of agency and freedom within them. So, like, say Westworld as a fictional example, highly virtual, but highly ethical decisions in some way. In some ways, not. We would have to think about the consequences, but there are consequences, and we could really talk about that at some point. The Matrix. There's a virtual world with also sort of heavy implications for action. But then, like, going a step or two down, like Metal Gear Solid VR missions within the scope of the Metal Gear Solid world. You're learning how
Mhm.
to act within the world. The world is itself sort of a stealth simulator. That's kind of odd. And then down to like a JRPG, or an open world JRPG, and then JRPG. One thing I wanted to say is that I think part of the what you're noticing about a game having a narrative and a plot is that it has to, in order to be something, in order to be a narrative, there are certain limitations to it in terms of size and scope and time and perhaps even themes. And so in order to
Yeah.
have character, it can't be purely inclusive. So we use
Yeah.
this language of exclusive and inclusive these days, and often with political, social sort of values attached to them. But just looking philosophically at making a work of art, there are going to be elements that have to be excluded. To work within a certain genre and medium, there are going to be even more elements excluded, like thousands of pages added on to the first 300, or even the use of page or the use of language, for example, instead of visual media. These are all very simple points that I think get very much forgotten when people use big words without thinking through the ramifications of the words. But what I think you're touching on is that there is a balance between linearity and freedom, or between conscription and freedom. And the balance might be what's most important, to have a lot of freedom or to have a lot of limitation or to have 30/70. I'm not sure. We'd have to run a study on this. But it might also be the quality of the decisions as well.
Mhm.
So maybe you only have 8 to 15 decisions that have ramifying value within the game or ramifying effects. But those decisions become extremely important then. And that's something that having a very finite amount of choices does. it increases the valency, the emotional valency and the importance of these choices. And so when you have 1,000 choices to make, the valency there's a hierarchy to choice, of course. Maslow told us this, right? Or taught us this. So yeah, certain choices are going to naturally be more important than others. Like if there's life or death decision, as opposed to like what you're going to wear for your shirt, and those aren't tied together, and you know that, then okay, one's going to affect you more. But in Chrono Trigger, it is proto open world in that we do not have nearly as many choices, but it might also be just artistically superior to certain open world games in that it gets the right mix of important decisions and
Mhm.
actual game. Because a problem I think you're putting your finger on with open world games is, well, they can lose their narrative and their story, and the narrative and story is often one of the most, if not the most provocative element for RPG players, even more than the ludology and sometimes even the characterization. That's a terrible word. The characters, I should say. And we've seen this too with games being open world, but then also linear. At the same time, we were getting like Elder Scrolls, Skyrim, and also online games which are very open. We're getting Final Fantasy X and then 13, which are extremely
Mm.
linear as well. So it's not like over time we just figured that out. That's still being, I think, parsed out by major game developers. And I think maybe that's another amazing thing that Chrono Trigger did. Simplistically thinking, it might have been like, oh, well, just give the players even more freedom. They seem to like this freedom. It's like, yes, but no, it's actually how you gave them the freedom and the constraints you put on the freedom that made the choices more engaging.
Yes.
It wasn't just the freedom. It was the whole impact that you get from setting up the situation in a way that has more emotional resonance than just again putting on your shirt or do you want tomatoes on this sandwich? Okay, so I said I was going to say a bunch of things, but I said a bunch of things about one thing, and so I'm going to give it a yeah. So even I can't keep myself on a leash. So
No, no, but I think that is the key point, right? The freedom consists not so much in the actual case of the thing, like can you actually do some stuff or whatever. It's more about, for our purposes at least, like how does that impact the player in this case, or the person, right? What is your consciousness? What is your awareness of that freedom and of its, significance or something like that, right? And so I think, yeah, the level of story cohesion in Chrono Trigger is unusually tight. Like
yes,
basically everything in this
very tight.
world is like is in some way significant.
Yes,
Um,
Chekhov's shotgun is everywhere.
it's a thing of beauty. I mean, I think as far as games to analyze, if you're interested in the design of this kind of game, it really doesn't get much better. And it does, but it's strange because at the same time, it's idiosyncratic in a lot of ways. Like
Yes.
the decision to have enemies appear on the world map, and then when you encounter them or they jump out and get you, they don't go into a battle screen, right? You just stay on that world map, and now it's the battle screen. And the sprites are all exactly the same, but they have maybe some more animations and stuff. Like that's a remarkably, like in hindsight, a crazy obvious thing to do. But I don't know. I just maybe there's other games that did it before. But that combination of action gameplay with the active time battle, and you can choose to have it just be a straight up take your turns kind of battle. It, that's almost unique, I think. The ways that you have to time your attacks, right? Because the sprites are kind of
Yes.
slowly moving
Yes.
around, and maybe they'll get closer, maybe they'll move, and the way that they configure themselves allows your attacks to be way more effective if you just wait for the right opportunity. And the cursor's kind of indicating that for you, but also just like your feel for things after a while. Um, and then there's some really simple, like the magic system. It's basically a really simple rock, paper, scissors. You either have lightning, you have fire, you have ice, and enemies are basically going to be maybe immune to one of those or weak to one of those, or they're weak to magic in general versus physical attacks or vice versa, right? It's like there's just a series of really basic mechanical choices, essentially, that the player is kind of juggling at all times. and they're constantly on the lookout for like, is there an item here that can I talk to this person? Can I find out a little bit more about this world, right? And so it's just it hits this really great easing the player in kind of level. And then there's difficulty spikes every so often, right, to keep you on your toes a little bit. Um, but ultimately, yeah, it's just kind of a sweet spot of the illusion of freedom, the illusion of agency, wrapped in a incredibly well-paced, well-plotted, you know, the way that you move back in time, back to the present,
Mhm.
forward in time,
Yes.
to the end of time, back to the present, right? It's like it's just sort of this dance. You're constantly like seeing new perspectives on the same locations, on the same basic themes, but they're just kind of be put in this different light as different characters come in and out. I just yeah, I just don't think it's been surpassed. And so it's beautiful, like to me that you're playing it on a way more advanced system, but I just don't think there's any games on that system that even come close to the level of like excellence of design of this game. It's
Okay, well,
yeah.
so that's great because that was my second point that I wanted to make, and that I really want to get into, and that might have to be its own discussion. Is so I am playing on an advanced system of the PS3, but it is the very second port, the PS1 port, that I'm
Mm.
playing that was with Final Fantasy IV, I believe. In fact, there's a strategy guide that you can still find online that's the Final Fantasy IV and Chrono Trigger officials. It's the strategy guide to
Oh,
the
for that
anthology that
edition.
you bought as one.
Nice.
Um,
Hmm.
but I really wanted to ask about similarities and differences between. Oh, so okay, so let me frame this better. Chrono Trigger is a very short game, a very, in some ways, straight. Well, okay, I'm going to avoid. It is short, but I'm going to avoid saying straightforward or simple because it's certainly not simplistic, and sometimes those words seem to mean or connote that to someone. Compared to, say, Xenogears or Final Fantasy VII, which
Hmm.
both are more like 40 to 60-hour games and can be 70 or 80-hour games that sort of go on and on. And then Xenogears' case, perhaps lose themselves a little bit. There's just
Hmm.
not as much of an attempt to do something that expansive. And so I've seen various, so one of the Resonant Arc guys, his favorite game is Xenogears. And the other one, however, his former favorite game is Chrono Trigger, though
Mm.
that's been surpassed by Outer Wilds in the past like 5 years. So
Hmm.
how could these are both Square games from the Golden Age, but one's like a 60 to 80-hour game, one's a 20-hour game. One is much more complicated in terms of the sort of psychoanalytical, mystical, religious ideas in it
Hmm.
than the other, and yet, it is the sort of short story tightness aspect of this game that is the right way to look at it. Besides the implications of thinking about moving around time, which can expand to the dimensions of Xenogears, right? Like when
Yeah.
you get into time travel and causality, that can get we could go very deep, much deeper. We could probably spend more time talking about that than playing through the game multiple times,
Yes.
even. But right, it is a very different Square experience in that way. 1995, it's a little bit before some of these games, 1997, 99, 2000, on the SNES, like you said. And so there are some limitations, but within the limitations, again, like I'm saying, I don't want maximum freedom. I want freedom that allows me to make choices that have maximum resonance with me.
Hmm.
Some I'm actually realizing right now. That's what Chrono Trigger nails. And in terms of the story, allowing for you to do that and feel that being the most important thing that a story or perhaps an interactive story like this can do, an interactive piece of art, a game, um, there's no diluting. Like you said, it's like a shot of espresso or a shot of whiskey or a short story. It's not a short story. It is more like a novella. It's like a short novel, but every sentence like Hemingway, every sentence matters. Every sentence hits. So it's a very maximally aesthetic experience, like you said, and that they don't waste huts. They don't waste characters. They don't waste even comments. By other characters, while there's also this extraordinarily complicated time travel element. And something I just want to mention, and it's sort of tangential, but I didn't know that I had forgotten that Magus created Lavos, and so we're at some point going to have to consider that. I mean, in some ways that sounds
Hmm.
a lot like Sephiroth summoning Meteor, but uh, yeah. So I really want to think about their relationship. But so that's the setup for the very short point I'm going to make, which is something I would like for us to think about too, after having just played Final Fantasy IX, which is such a summative game and tries to integrate elements from the PS1 era and before, prior to moving on to the PS2 era, which is, they already have a team halfway through Final Fantasy X when Final Fantasy IX comes on, right? Because of the multiple teams going concurrently at that time. Is how does Chrono Trigger reflect the elements from its time? How is it different? I just a couple of things. Time comes up quite a bit in Final Fantasy VIII. Zidane is supposedly something like a Chrono Trigger in 9, but that goes undeveloped.
Yeah.
It's sort of medieval-ish, but it's actually set in contemporary times, kind of like Earthbound, but then you go back to the past. And then of course the Masamune is there and spiky-haired protagonist. And
Y-
uh and
Totally.
and Magus is kind of a lot like Sephiroth and not. He's highly stylized, silver-haired, badass. But he's actually part of this, huge war
Hmm.
between these people. So a little bit like Final Fantasy IX, a little bit like Wutai and Shinra in
Hmm.
Final Fantasy VII. But there's this racial war, this kingdom war, but between like these magical beings and the
Yeah.
humans.
Yeah.
And we learn a little bit about this through the magical beings still having a tremendous prejudice against the humans, wanting to sell us various swords for 65,000 uh, uh, of the gil or dollars that they use in there. And so
Yeah.
yeah. So yeah, I was just saying I agree with the tightness. It's amazing that it's tight. It's very different from many of the Final Fantasies in that way, maybe more similar to Final Fantasy 9 and 10 and maybe 13 in that respect. But it seems to have done its tightness and linearity in a way that is unproblematic in ways that Final Fantasy 10 and 13 are. Perhaps because of integrating appropriate and important choice elements.
Yeah. Like it almost feels like a Final Fantasy in a lot of ways. I believe that the development started, it was going to be part of the Legend of Mana series, like the Secret of Mana, Legend of Mana. And so it was going to be within that world as well. And so there's a lot of shared DNA across all this, of
Yes.
course, right? Particularly with the Square side of things. But then you factor in like the Yuji Horii piece of it, the Dragon Quest piece of it, which to me, what that contributes in a broad strokes is just like a tempering of the complexity, right?
Mm,
Because Final Fantasy tends to get way convoluted and just like over
right.
the top with the themes and the you're fighting God. Oh no, you're fighting something above that God. Like, but it's just like okay, just chill, like let's just bring it down a notch. And that has to do with the design as well, right? Akira Toriyama tends to be with that Dragon Quest, tends to be with that more, I don't know, just like a little bit lighthearted, like, okay, I'm
Mhm.
gonna like grind for a little bit, level up, and then I'm gonna do this thing. Like I'm not that invested, if that's the right word, in unpacking like all of the crazy religious thematic crap that's going on, right? And so it does have that kind of beautiful synergy between those two things, and it finds that nice happy medium. Um, I think in terms of the like the character arcs, if that's the right word, like the way that we have this protagonist who's silent and yet has a ton of spunk and personality through his expressiveness, through his involvement in other people's, lives, the way that they sort of mirror what he's supposed to be doing or saying, like back to you. From the very first moments, right? His mom, like getting him out of bed, like, come on, like, let's go. Like, this is your chance to hang out with your friend. She's got a new invention. Man, she's crazy, isn't she? Right. And so it's just like there's all of um, this very effective development of that character, even though he's a total cipher for the player, right? And a total stand-in for the player. Um, and that just is amplified more and more until you get to Magus, who's the most complex character, right? By far. Um, he is like, yes, responsible for summoning Lavos in a way, but he is doing that, you find out in Zeal, because his sister has been taken by Lavos, right? His beloved older sister Shala, and and so he's trying to rescue her, right? He's trying to get revenge on Lavos for that. And so there's, a very complicated family dynamic there with his mother as well as just a piece of work, right? And so I think that the greatest game of this era, Earthbound, of course, Mother 2, um, does this better than all of them, where it has all of the same kind of cliche elements, but it is very self-consciously picking apart, satirizing, deepening, playing with every one of those things, right? But particularly with the fundamental unit of the party and the world, right? What is the relationship between this silent protagonist, his teammates, his friends, and the world that they're in? And it just like digs into that and digs into that. And it also has a time travel component, which gets very circular if you think about it. But again, you're not really beholden to that because it's just a mechanic. It's just a way to talk about other things, really, right? To get at this question of free will and fate, of destiny, of being the hero. What does it mean to be a hero? To save the world? For what? Like, so what? So it's just like think about those things through these very simplistic game mechanics. And somehow, yeah, I think of it like a poem, A poem imposes a set of rules onto the language, which when you work within them allows you to deepen and clarify your thought in a way that just writing a bunch of stuff willy-nilly will never let you do, right? And so I think that that's the power of these very limited games, that they have that function of the poetic form. And of course, they're also working with all kinds of limitations of like, can we get people to buy this thing, right? And they really understood the psychology of their audience because these were highly successful. Maybe not as successful as they would have liked. Chrono Trigger famously doesn't have a third game, which is kind of heartbreaking when you think about it. Like, there's 20 Final Fantasies, and we can't get a third Chrono Trigger? Come on. I mean, yeah, they have Radical Dreamers, but that's like its own weird thing. As far as like a full sequel, you only get Chrono Cross, and that's a real it's a real bummer. Anyway, but so yeah, I mean, I think the the kinds of approach, the kinds of twists that they did to some of these very recognizable tropes, they just put the right amount of spin on them, the right amount of weight, and it just lands like bullseye every time, every time.
That's huge, and I'm glad that I'm finally getting to play one of your favorite games, and look forward to hopefully playing Earthbound with you someday. Even though I know
Mm.
you've already done a full podcast on it, same with
Ah,
Gears, maybe something like Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time. I know we tried to do Majora's Mask, which actually reminds me that I should say that I recently picked up yesterday, Valentine's Day.
mm,
Um, these mangas that I don't know how long they've been around. I can very easily check, but they are based on the games.
hmm
And I haven't read through them yet. This is the Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time Legendary Edition with story and art by Akira Himekawa. But I'm betting these are from around. Oh, these are a little older than actually I thought. Um, 10 years old. But since I've never beaten Majora's Mask, I really want to read this. And so I wonder if this is
dude, yeah.
going to be a stand-in. Speaking of silent protagonists and the sort of philosophical differences between creators, I know that that was a difference that they had, like a Sakaguchi versus I guess Toriyama, or whoever held that. One of the three major players in Chrono Trigger held that they had philosophical debates about that, and he won out. But there was one of them in particular who had very strong feelings about that, and
Mm,
breaking the immersion of the player. It was his perspective that when the all of a sudden your character blurts out something that you are not thinking, that just
yeah.
destroys the immersion. That's an interesting philosophy. Obviously,
I think
not true for everybody, but yeah.
I think that that's Yuji Horii,
Is
the
it Yuji
the
Horii?
dragon the
Okay.
Dragon Quest,
Okay.
god. Yeah, yeah,
Oh,
yeah.
okay.
Pretty sure.
No, 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 that does make sense. And I this is something that we can talk about on Final or that can be found on Final Fantasy Union when talking about Chrono Trigger. Perhaps also Resonant Arctic actually, because I did listen to their episode from 9 years ago, which was really good and no bones against them, but I really like their stuff from 9 years ago. There's just a certain passion and a certain moment in their lives, particularly with I forget what their names, Mike and it's not Caden, but it's something
K
like that.
K
But
Kaysen? Yeah.
Kaysen, yes.
Yeah, I think
And
this is the Resonant Arc guys, right? Not the
those were the
Final Fantasy
Resonant
Union
Art guys.
guys.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah,
it's
yeah.
Daryl and somebody else over at Final Fantasy Union, another two people, but I think they're married, or in a relationship in any case.
Mhm.
Mike and Caden, or Kaysen, excuse me, I think, at least Kaysen is married with kids. But Mike's work in particular from 9 years ago, I like. But okay, just a couple things I was going to mention because we're sort of getting into it now is something I would like to talk about in the future. I'm just like throwing things out into the future, but we're talking about time and Chrono Trigger, so why not?
Fits.
Is relationship between Trigger and Nier Automata.
Mm.
That's a game that neither of us has finished, but we both are aware of the story and what it does with New Game Plus, and is also put out by
Super
Square
interesting. Yeah,
Enix
yeah.
again. So it's another, but this is a different Square and a different generation. Fine, but that's all stuff that we can consider and analyze. That's just more information to look at. That doesn't keep us from being able to see, you know. Um, I wanted to say that my Dante essay on Dante, Final Fantasy VII, and Final Fantasy VIII just came out. I'll be sending that to Square pretty soon. It's 42
Oh,
pages
cool.
long, but hopefully people still read it. Um, that is the beginning of my basis for doing this Chrono Trigger essay, which I'm going to be citing myself. I'd recommend you cite me too, just because I think it'll be helpful, but
For
also
sure.
because I think this paper
For
is going to be
adaptation
important.
material. Yeah, yeah.
I
It's
think
does a lot of work.
I think it's part of the foundation of the scholarly part of what we're doing. And we have a creative aspect, we have a visual, sort of an audio media or audio video aspect, but also we have a scholarly backbone too. And so we're very slowly building our foundation, but it is quite the foundation, I think, and
Yeah.
especially for people working in sort of broadly speaking media studies, at a popular level, at a teaching level, at a scholarly level. We try and put out a lot of stuff and really contribute a lot, I think. And we put a lot into what we do as well. This is the most literary and philosophical video game analysis that exists. And
To my knowledge, yeah.
and we yeah, and to my knowledge too, and we're looking to find,
No, this is
we
something Pat Holloman said to me. I actually interviewed him once about Xenogears, and he was like, I don't think that there's anything like this out there. And I mean, because it's kind of a crazy level of close reading.
yeah,
But I think you're right. Like what we can do is then use this as the foundation, use this as a place to build out from,
yes,
right? And to have those kind of theoretical, more academic side to it, but then also maybe a more wider audience facing, like here's a theme that you've heard of, like how
yes.
does this game that you've also heard of deal with that theme, like in a really clear way. So yeah, I think that's a good direction to go in, perhaps.
We've done the propedeutic work, and we now have hundreds of people that follow us regularly. Who knows whether that turns into 1,000 faster or not, but I think we both intend to do this for the foreseeable future.
Yeah.
And we've already hit a lot of the snags that would have tripped us up if we were going to get tripped up on things. We've done this for years. And so let me see. I think there was one other little interesting thing I wanted to mention. Okay, a couple of them actually. The mini games, I just wanted to mention to brag that I did have Chrono chosen in his favor, or the decision went in my favor. 4 not guilty, 3 guilty.
Oh, nice.
Though I felt very exposed by the fact that I had pulled Marley's arm and she's like a kidnapper. And I'm like, a good lawyer would have said like, not actually. Who calls your kidnapper a kidnapper? But I also beat that confounded racing robot in 2300 that I think that took me several tries when I first played. It took me one
Oh
try
God.
this time around. I really harnessed my Paul Walker and Fast and the Furious spirit there, and I was happy to do that. Okay, yes, okay. This
Nice.
is a terrible thing to end on. But I just saw a hypothesis that came out, and so maybe there's something to mull over. Even though we don't have a lot of time because we're coordinating tomorrow the conclusion to Ada or Ardor.
Oh
And it looks
gosh,
like
yeah.
you were right about a lot of things, which I'm happy about. But I was a pessimist. You were an optimist, and you've been rewarded apparently. But I actually still have to finish it. But a hypothesis that I saw put forward, which I think is pretty gnarly, which I say as a Californian, because I think I drop into vernacular, right? Because I think it hits on something, is that fans of the game of JRPGs and uh, these days are not developing the same sort of relationship to them as we did growing up in the late 90s because games are coming out far less frequently. So,
Hmm.
and this isn't in general, there are more games coming out, right? You have infinite sorts of capture games on your phone, Steam, all these systems. It's amazing. But Final Fantasies, when was the last time a mainline Final Fantasy came out? 16. But that was a couple years ago. When is 17 coming out? No timeline.
Oof. Yeah, who knows?
Kingdom Hearts 3 came out something like 5 years ago. And Kingdom Hearts 4, they're just now saying that they're developing it. Dragon Quest has been mostly mired in remakes lately. Dragon Quest 7 reimagined, Dragon
Hmm.
Quest I think 11 is the most recent one to come out, but then they just remade 8 as well. So part of the ethos of the current CEO is to create remakes and adaptations. So two things I'll say is that Xenogears and Chrono Trigger are two of the games that have been called for to have at least revisions,
Hmm.
if not full on remakes, because Xenogears has just that obvious second disc that's all narration that needs to be turned into gameplay. There's that was just purely a time thing. And so,
Yeah.
and then also Chrono Trigger has sort of a sequel, but not really. It's one of these spin-off realities that sort of closes up and disappears, perhaps. And so it's really very tangential
Yeah.
from a chrono literal mathematical level tangential, right? It doesn't stay on the main timeline. And so we need a main timeline
Yeah.
successor. That's a real successor, I think, in the minds of fans, of people who play these games. And so yeah, people can use as much casuistry as they want to say that Chrono Trigger is related to Chrono Cross. Correct, but not like a sequel would
Hmm.
be. Like a tangential spinoff would be. And there are, I think there are legal reasons for that. And I think we could get into this, but this work's been done. I think there are sort of legal and team reasons for why Xenogears
Yeah.
hasn't been remade, and same with Chrono Trigger as well. And that one of them is, and I'll get this data for our fourth and possibly final podcast on this, but then one of them is like almost impossible for some reason
Yeah.
right now. So, well, um, so I just wanted to put out that hypothesis, which I think is scary, that these games aren't being made frequently enough for people to have enough experiences to have the sort of experience that we had. And that possibly part of what makes these games great is not just them, but the fact that you get the cycle re-envisioned, and then you get a new one, and then you get a new one, and then you
Hmm.
get a new one, and you get to judge them against each other, and you get to see the concepts refined, and you get to feel the concepts like in a way that we couldn't articulate at the time. But I knew that I liked Final Fantasy 7 and 8 most, and that I played them together, and so they were like the same thing to me. And I liked Final Fantasy 9 third to that.
Hmm. Hmm.
And now I can articulate what I like more about 7, and the scope, the magnificence, than 9, which is more of a recapitulation. And I didn't play the earlier games, but having them all together is the real gift. The Halloween basket. It's not, just the Reese's and the Butterfinger and the Almond Joy.
Yeah.
One of those is my favorite, but my real favorite is having all three.
It's the it's the smorgasbord. Yeah, the cornucopia. Well, that's the thing. Like, I mean, in a way, now they you're correct, and it's not the same because they aren't coming out. You're not like having that anticipation of, okay, what's the next version of this going to be like? On the other hand, they're all out, right?
They're
They're
all out.
all
You're right.
there,
There's so much
and
already there.
all you need is the awareness of like, okay, I want to play that thing. And now that I've played that thing, oh, like I'm interested in seeing more like that thing. Well, here's this other one. Here's this other one. So it's like, it's almost you know, the paralysis of too many options, though.
Yes.
It's
No,
like,
no, 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 no. Right. The open world problem.
how can you ever find the good stuff in this sea of schlock, right? Of so much material.
Well, we're going to have to help. They're going to
I
need
hope so, yeah.
guides. They're going to need guides. And so that means we're going to have to sometimes go places. uh, Not every cave is as valuable as every other cave, but to be a good guide, you have to know the good caves as opposed to the not, or the valuable caves as opposed to the
The
not as.
diamond in the rough. Yeah.
Yes. But that's the difference between the student and the teacher. The
Yeah.
student assumes that they go linearly, immediately to that place, whereas the teacher's like, well, I've actually searched the entire forest and I can show you where it is. But don't
Hmm.
think that because I've shown you that it was in any way a fast process for me to have found that,
That's right.
or that this is a natural process for you to just get to go there. That's that's the value of guidance. It saves
Indeed.
a lot of time. It gets you where you're going as fast as you want to get there, basically, or as fast as you can get there. And so maybe that's something that we're helping alongside of our friends at Final Fantasy Union and Resonant Arc. They're much bigger than we are now, but as again, public servants and scholars, I think and writers, we wouldn't expect to be as big. I mean, Resonant Arc, those guys are video guys. Like they're cinemat. I think they studied like film and they wanted to
Oh,
make,
clearly. Yeah, yeah.
so like I said earlier, I think confirmed media studies individuals and people who are obviously going to excel at this medium, where video editing is a huge aspect. And then, you know, concept guys like, scholars like us who like to write and speak in front of people with a blackboard. We're just not going to measure up quite as well in this space. So we've got long swords, but we're moving through the mud. And
It's
so,
yeah.
you
It's a
know,
different speed.
it's a different speed. Yeah, right. But that said, we have had a recent uptick in subscriptions. So please do subscribe. Please do like. Please make comments. We love comments. Both of us will comment back
Mhm.
potentially.
Eventually. Yeah.
And I know Wes is on there less than I am, but Wes is on there. I've seen him ask questions and
Have
answer
you?
things before. So please do follow us along. We're going to be doing this for a long time. We've been doing this for a long time. I'd say we're still very young, but very experienced too. And so looking forward to finishing Chrono Trigger for
Hmm.
next Sunday. Wow. Wow. I mean, I think I will have, but it's going to be unfortunate when you tell me all the side quests that you've done and I tell you how linear my experience was.
You're a New Game Plus. I mean, it's supposed to be a little bit, yeah, it's a little different experience. That's okay.
Yeah. And something we didn't talk about today, I don't know if you have 1 minute to talk about this, is where you're at with your writing. And so everything's due in
Yeah.
8 days. Our 2-page outline, which I'm going to have to really get on. So here's my scholarly process. I'm usually quite on things, but I have so much going on that it's just impossible for me to be on anything really. I'm behind on everything. So I've become that kind of scholar. It's overwhelming, but oddly I'm not that stressed because I just know I'm working as hard as I can constantly, and
Yeah.
that gives me a certain ethical stealing, right? I'm like, what can I do? uh but yeah, I'm at capacity, as it were.
So yeah, I have started chunking out a little bit of what I had already written as the abstract and just kind of what just think about like what order is this going to go in? How am I
Yes.
going to
Cool.
expand? That's all but like I said, the big thing for me at this stage is I need to find at least a handful of articles and things that are out there. And yeah,
Well,
you've mentioned them,
maybe we can have
that
a meeting about that and maybe even make it into a podcast, because there are layers of
yeah.
that, and maybe I could just talk to you a little bit about what you might find most important to talk about, because just to do fairness to video game scholars and media scholars, and there are a lot of scholars
Oh yeah.
on this sort of thing. And so, there and those are each their own little libraries that are sometimes expected by other scholars. Zeitgeist, I think, is going to be much smoother about that, not nearly as anal retentive as a scholarly journal would be. But that
Right.
is to say is that when it comes to providing scholarship, it could be adaptation scholarship, it could be straight video game scholarship, it could be video game industry scholarship, it could be arguments between narratology and ludology, so
Yeah.
there, whatever is most interesting to you is the scholarship that should be in there. So like something on localization. So not just necessarily something with Chrono Trigger in the name. For
Right.
example,
Right.
it's
Right.
going to be, though I do want to give some love where I don't think love is always given. And so you asked me earlier, like, what have I been finding? And you said, make sure you don't mention that boss fight books that I don't like that much. And
No, no, I just wanted to go on
no,
the record and say I don't think it's their best entry since you did bring it up. I mean, yeah, it's a book. It's got some good stuff in it.
okay, okay, well, so I'm looking right now. So reverse design, very easy to get. I might but also Remy Lopez, the same guy who does Legend of Final Fantasy, has a Legend of Chrono Trigger. I don't know if it's translated from French, but
The third edition, yeah, those people, they have a lot of good stuff.
they do great stuff, and their Final Fantasy IX work pretty good too. But there's a self-published work. So I was looking for stuff today, and I saw a little book about 168 pages, but I couldn't find a publisher, and that made me think, oh, this might be self-published. But I'm gonna give this guy some love. I
Hmm.
haven't read it, but one of the review, and I'm not going to read it, but because one of the reviews said the person who wrote this is sort of like a playthrough, and this is what we do. Clearly not a professional writer, which turned me off immediately as a professional writer. I'm like, I can't read non-professionals. I just can't do it. Uh, or continental philosophers. Those are the two things I can't. Well, in any case, I read lots of non-professional writing as part of my job, and but but the comments also said that the person who wrote it clearly loved it. So this is by Jeremy R. Dunn. Corridors of Time, I think fantastic name. A look through Chrono Trigger, a masterpiece of gaming. And so I appreciate this sort of project. It's sad that he couldn't get a book contract, but those can be tough. And so I'm going to give it some love. I'm not
Yeah,
going
you
to
gotta look
cite
at it.
him. I'm not choosing to read him at this moment, but I might still buy the book and look through it a little bit.
Cool.
And that's only a scholarly judgment against him because it's self-published and not published in a by a scholarly press or by any press at this point. That's just part of the game. Though, if somebody does read it and says there's a really great point in there, I will put my snobbery away and I will look through it and I will potentially quote him because I'm also happy to quote non-scholarly sources if they make really good points.
Yeah.
I think scholarly points can be made outside of scholarly works, and I'm happy to integrate that sort of work. That said, yeah, so the Remy Lopez Legend of Chrono Trigger, I'm going to be looking into that. There might be a translation. I think you read French pretty well. I read it pretty well. And with this sort of work, it's actually, I'm not trying to sound like somebody very good at languages or like somebody that wants to downplay the difficulty, but it's very similar to English. And so if you do have a little bit of French, it's not reading French poetry. It
Yeah.
might even be a good way to learn more French. But in any case, I'll try and I'll see. He writes in French. Sometimes it gets translated to Spanish, then to English. Sometimes it stays in French. Um, I can let you know. This is all these are all very small points, but is my sort of response to what you asked earlier that I realize I didn't really address at the time.
Yeah, it's cool. We can do it in the next one or one in between now and then.
Yeah. Okay, cool,
Yeah, I
cool.
gotta run.
And well, I'm looking forward to talking to you more about that. I'm gonna have to talk to you a little bit more about developing my ideas and making sure I have my 3 or 4 points that I want to make. Try and make it as fun and painless as possible. That'd be great.
For sure. That's
Okay.
that's the goal here. Get through it. Make
Okay,
it
well,
clear. Make it.
it was so easy to sign off last time because I'd be like, well, sign in the Moogles. little diary because that was such a cool little that was such a cool
Mm,
conceit for saving. Now it's like you just kind of interact with these stars, and
yeah,
so
the
it's
magic
like
circle.
tinkle sound. Oh yeah, so leaving the magic circle. Okay, very good. Well done. Well done, my friend. Okay, well, that's a win to end on.
All
Well,
right.
leaving the magic circle, my friend. Till
Take
next time.
care.